Along with individual experts, Surgeon Masters brings you life improvement strategies in 10 minutes. These proven principles and strategies are easy to learn and can be applied immediately, allowing you to practice your best. Here's your host, Jeff Smith.
On this episode of the Surgeon Masters mini podcast, I have with me physician and physician coach, Scott Markowitz. Dr. Markowitz is a pediatric anesthesiologist. He's board certified coach with Physician Leadership LLC and the former vice chair for anesthesiology for the Professional Development and Diversity, Equity, Inclusion at Washington University, St. Louis. Welcome, Scott.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you join us for a podcast. We've reconnected after a little bit of time and talking quite some time ago about your early journeys into coaching and not so early journeys in leadership, because you've been doing that for a while. But I'm glad you're here and willing to share some insights to our mostly surgeon audience, coming from the viewpoint of maybe an anesthesiologist and another just observer of making healthcare better.
Well, I'm excited to be here, and I think you know how much I enjoy talking.
Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit of what you think those of us can do to sort of, I guess I would say, improve the environment in the operating room when it feels at times we're coming at things from such an opposite angle, but that doesn't make sense when we're really in it together to take care of the patient.
I know, we're going to jump right into the hard days, right? I think this is not that rare that, especially in the anesthesia world where I may have a couple of rooms and I may work with several surgeons in the same room in the course of the day, it's quite possible to have a situation that comes up that activates one or another of us. And those sorts of things sometimes are schedules and timing, sometimes inefficiencies, sometimes things that are unrelated. But whatever it is, once activated, I myself, even with experience having been coached and being a coach and a trainer for a long time, I may carry that with me into the next experience, or I may bring that with me into the situation. The same thing happens, I'm confident because of my coaching experience, the same thing happens on the other side of the drape, where because of things that are visible to me or perhaps not visible to me, the situation is going and some assumptions are being made that are not charitable, and we end up in a situation where people are rubbed the wrong way and it feels like things are tense or spiraling. When that happens, I always think about my early experience with coaching and recognizing that when I can take a step back and start to realize that this is a perfectly reasonable, rational person who has the same types of needs and desires that I do, and especially when it comes to the care of the patient, I can lean on that part of my empathy and come back to the conversation with an approach to understand rather than to drive a particular perspective. And that is really my starting point when we get into the deep stuff.
Well, and I can relate very much having that thoughts and feelings. And I could even say sometimes from all sorts of different reasons that, whether I was triggered through the night or lack of sleep or who knows what else. I could even argue that sometimes at the moment I might not even be rational, but sure, like in the end, if you could unwind me, if I'm wound up or whatever, because there's a lot of different factors, then I think I would go back into that rational state.
For me, one of the things that helps the most is having an ongoing relationship. And so these are impossible things. When I went to WashU 3 years ago, it was a new environment. And even though I brought the best me that I could, I didn't have a trusting relationship with most of the other folks, either in my department or in other departments. And it takes a little bit of time. And I realize that because you can't always read, say, my sense of humor. I have a surgeon that I had worked with for 15 years before going to WashU who would be known for sometimes walking down this path of frustration. And then one thing after another, he is demonstrating that frustration and not meaning to perhaps, but definitely feeling like he takes it out on others. And I was really, after developing trust with him over a few years and understanding this pattern, I could change that with a joke or sarcasm or even teasing. That I could move that in a position where I think his level of comfort with the situations grew higher because he perceived me having a high level of comfort with the situation. And I think that was really helpful. But you can't just do that with someone you don't have a relationship with, because that might come off as arrogant or might come off as sarcastic, and neither of those are likely to build warmth and relieve tensions on the other side of the drape, as we say.
That's a fantastic example. I'm wondering if you could share another example of just that, trying to match the interaction and or building trust, whatever you think is like another example of this dynamic between anesthesia and surgery.
Well, sure. I mean, the teasing one works really well during an operation or in the operating room because you have that relationship and you have that closeness. And, I can get my forehead right next to your forehead in the OR. It's not always desirable. It depends. I mean, maybe not if we're doing a shoulder, right? But in other settings, but in between cases, if you have a long list, and one of my circumstances as a pediatric anesthesiologist might be 20 ENT operations in a single room, and that surgeon's looking at a 7 or 8 p.m. departure time if I take an extra 10 minutes here and an extra 10 minutes there. And, we all know what MARFAT is. But in reality, they're not mad at me because I have a relationship with them. They know that I'm doing what needs to be done, although they may get frustrated when they're running behind if I seem to be teaching or more patient in my supervision or something like that. When those things happen, I have to do that offline. I can't have that conversation while they're operating because that is the time they're trying to make up in terms of efficiency. So I have to figure out how to do the turnover faster or how to get them before they're scrubbed in at the table in order to have the real conversation, which is, I perceive that you are having some frustration or uncomfortable with the schedule. Is there anything you'd like to share with me? Is there anything I can do to help? And that is not taking the assumption that it's all my fault, but allowing for the possibility that it's something that I can address directly or that I have created. And it's also an opportunity for them to vent outside of the setting of being heard by the entire team, of potentially activating the emotions of the scrub or the circulator or maybe my CRNA trainee colleagues or their own colleagues. Like they don't want to look unleaderly in that setting. And so doing those in between, and, I have to stick my neck out a little bit and be vulnerable and accept the fact that I cost time sometimes. And sometimes it's without my ability to control it. It can be really hard to get an IV in a little kid. And there's some things you can't do without that, but they're there on the table under anesthesia. And there's no efficiency within the OR that I can create at that point.
Scott, those are absolutely fantastic examples. And I want to have you help me do a little bit of a teaser to our audience that, join us for a little bit of a longer conversation here shortly. But what would you summarize as a take-home message and maybe let them know, hey, come join us for this longer conversation on another link? What would your wrap up for this short mini session be?
Well, certainly for all the surgeons that we're talking to, my thought is that there is a way that you can drive your anesthesiologist toward having this perspective and toward being a partner in this rather than a sense of adversarial or at the very least agnostic to the schedule and time, as if it were not my fault or I have no influence over that. And the way to do that may be complex, but it develops from both your empathy and some skills in communication that can be learned by everyone.
Well, fantastic. Thanks for this little intro. And why don't you say thanks to our audience?
It's a pleasure to be here, Jeff. And thank you, all of you listeners out there, for your own development efforts. I appreciate it. It's great when I get to work with you.
There you have it. In less than 10 minutes, this is Jeff Smith along with Scott Markowitz. Until the next episode of Life Improvement Strategies for the Surgeon and Once More. Ciao.
Now, take 10 minutes and put your plan into action to practice your best.